We can take our seats so we can proceed. Of course, Madam Minister, you could have continued talking. I do not have any authority on you, so, but okay. So if we can get started, you know, I like to be on time. First of all, I would like to thank Marta for last evening. It was a very, very nice evening, and specifically the visit that we enjoyed. Of course, the guide showed us Velázquez and Caravaggio and all that, but I saw some other stuff. You know, I'm a little bit into art, and for those who might return, I've got a suggestion. Set aside from the Jan Bruegel, you know, Peter Bruegel, the elder, had two sons, Peter number 2 and Jan. Jan more into flowers and Peter more into the, you know, the little men and all that. A lot of nice pictures by Jan Bruegel, but there were 2 by Peter Bruegel. And we only saw one in the going around, and that's the one with the little boats of the port of Napoli. But there was a very nice one in the second room, which had like a landscape, like almost winter, with a lot of little people on that. So I would suggest that whoever, I'm a Belgian, Madam Minister, so I have to defend my colors. Another one that I saw was one of the versions of the money exchangers by Quentin Metzeis. And that was an amazing picture. I mean, I know a bit, this is really of very, very high quality. But the one that no one noticed, in my view the most important, was a Hans Memling. There's a Hans Memling in there. Wow. So, if any one of you would like to return and support the Belgian colors in this one, go there and go and have a look at some of our nice masters. By the way, there was also a lovely Guido Reni. Oh, la, 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 la. Well, anyway, thank you very much for this lovely evening. Very much appreciated. I would like to thank Madam Minister for the fact that this morning we had the jets flying over with the national colors. I'm not sure that was for us, but let's pretend it was for us. Makes us feel a little bit good, right? But still, those who were at the terrace, it was lovely to see it. So it's a little joke, but still, thank you for that. Dear colleagues, we come now on the debate on our next report, which will be represented by Sergei Vlasenko. On behalf of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights, the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy has been seized for an opinion which will be presented by Jolt Nemeth in the absence of the rapporteur, Madame Marta Cartabia. We absolutely have the honor of welcoming Marta Cartabia. Did I say that right? Or is it Cartabia? It's Cartabia, okay. Italian Minister of Justice. So we feel secure now. Thank you for being here, Madam Minister. And let me start by calling Mr. Vlasenko to present the report. It's in document 15403. You have 10 minutes in total, which you may divide between presentation of the report and reply to the debate. Mr. Vlasenko, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, dear Madam Minister of Justice, the draft resolution I'm presenting now was adopted by the Committee of Legal Affairs and Human Rights on the 5th of November this year by the large majority. I would like to thank my colleagues from the Legal Affairs Committee for that. Also, I would like to thank Madame Marta Cartabia and other members of the Committee of Political Affairs and Democracy for, to my mind, an excellent opinion that was adopted on the 3rd of November. The amendments proposed in this process were included to the draft resolution. I would like to say that by this draft resolution, the Assembly is continuing the fight against corruption, which was started in previous resolutions of the Assembly, especially 2130 of 2016, 1881 of 2012, 2216 of the 2018, and many, many, many others. Allow me to start my explanation and to explain the context of my report and the resolution. There have been 4 journalistic investigations: Laundromats, Panama, Paradise, and recently Pandora Papers. All have listed notorious names of beneficiaries of companies and accounts in different offshore zones. Those names included many politicians and public officials from member states of the Council of Europe, As well, all of them were mentioned as active users of offshore operations, allegedly to conceal assets and incomes. The financial records revealed a system of hidden interests which were shocked public opinion. It raised credible suspicions against politicians of being involved in corruption and money laundering. These suspicions have been reinforcing with every scandal. Some member states have reported a progress following the first 3 scandals. Unfortunately, I have not seen a proper political reaction on that. The impact of the last Pandora Papers investigations remained to be seen. So far, I observe that some of the politicians mentioned in these investigations continue to wield power despite of the serious suspicions. They undermine the public trust in the democratic institutions and rule of law. It is apparent that fighting and preventing corruption and money laundering might have failed in this respect. Thus, the resolution proposes to answer this failure from the perspective of political responsibility. It reiterates that the fight against corruption is one of the priorities of the Council of Europe. It quotes all relevant instruments adopted by the Assembly, the Committee of Ministers, Greco, Moneyval, and Venice Commission. All speak about negative effect of corruption, money laundering, and offshore scams on democratic institutions, the rule of law, and human rights. All say that politicians should display the highest standards of ethical behavior in public and private life. If the suspicion of corruption are proven beyond any reasonable doubt, politicians must face criminal charges. Also, the politicians are politically responsible for such actions. I would like to emphasize that this report solely focuses on the political responsibility a politician should bear in relation to the serious allegation of corruption activities and offshore scams. We are not talking about the criminal responsibility, administrative or civil one. The resolution does not in any possible way aim to undermine member states' criminal justice system, as well as the idea of the presumption of innocence in the criminal proceedings. This resolution only considers the political responsibility as non-criminal sanction. I should underline that, non-criminal sanction. And it does not constitute a violation of a presumption of innocence according to the European Court of Human Rights. The resolution invites member states to improve mechanisms on declaration of interests to include offshore interests which should not be perceived as infringement of the right to respect of the private life. According to the Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights, everyone has the right to respect for their private and family lives, his home and his correspondence. The idea is supported by the decision of the European Court of Human Rights in the case of Von Hanover versus Germany of 2004. That's a quotation. A fundamental distinction needs to be made between reporting facts, even controversial ones, capable of contributing to a debate in a democratic society relating to politicians in the exercise of their functions, for example, and reporting details of their private lives of an individual. So far, this resolution is adopted by the committee, reiterates that it is an obligation of the member states of the Council of Europe to fight corruption, money laundering, and tax-related offenses. In this context, any credible suspicion against politicians must be promptly investigated and subjected to a trial with a reasonable time and in full compliance with the national law and the international standards. Politicians should include offshore assets into their declarations of interest. Otherwise, they must be held immediately responsible for the breach of the public trust in democratic institutions. They also should withhold using offshore scams to concern revenues of evade paying taxes in their own countries. All politicians have an ethical duty to look on the question of the resignation pending investigation when the alleged misconduct is serious and the allegations are credible. I also should underline that only in the case when the alleged misconduct is serious and the allegations are credible. On the other hand, governments, political parties, and national parliaments should take actions against such politicians involved in offshore scams and corruption scandals. Accordingly to the resolution as adopted by the committee, makes the following call. Member states of the Council of Europe must ensure effective response to corruption through their criminal justice system. They should safeguard independency of the anti-corruption bodies. The recommendation and standards of the relevant body of the Council of Europe, in particular Greca and Moneyval, should be implemented in full. Political parties should induce the suspected politician to step down from their public functions in view of preserving public trust. Greca and Moneyval should encourage good practices of sanctioning politicians and public officials suspected of breaching public trust. And in the end, the Assembly could nominate a general rapporteur of fighting corruption, money laundering, and offshore scams according to the rules. I would like to say thank you once more to the Secretariat of the Legal Affairs Committee, to the Legal Affairs Committee itself, to the Political Affairs Committee, and to Madame Karamanli. I would like to stress once more that the resolution is not about the criminal responsibility for the corruption. It is talking only about the political responsibility, and only in the cases, I am quoting the draft resolution, where the alleged misconduct is sufficiently serious and the allegations are sufficiently credible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear colleague. I call now upon Mr. Nemeth Zsolt to present the opinion of the Committee of Political Affairs and Democracy. Zsolt, I recall that you have only 3 minutes. You have the floor.
Good morning, colleagues. On behalf of the rapporteur of the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy, Ms. Marta Cartabia, who unfortunately cannot be present today, I have the pleasure of presenting our committee's opinion on the report Fighting Corruption. Corruption is a major societal problem and a serious threat to the fundamental values of democracy, human rights, and rule of law, which we are working to protect and promote both in the Parliamentary Assembly and in our respective national parliaments. Corruption affects government's ability to govern in the public interest, and political corruption undermines the credibility of both political and public figures, as well as democratic institutions. This leads citizens to be disengaged from democratic processes and provides ground for populism. Therefore, it is essential for policymakers to address corruption and to take the necessary decisive measures to prevent, combat, detect, and sanction it effectively. Our committee therefore supports the conclusions and proposals of Mr. Vlasenko's report. In addition, it would like to highlight 3 issues. The Assembly should support and promote the work of the Council of Europe in the field of corruption. Thus, Member States should fully implement the recommendations, standards of the relevant Council of Europe bodies, especially Greco and Moneyval. Member States, secondly, should protect in law and in practice whistleblowers who play a key role in casting light on corruption scandals against any form of reprisal. Thirdly, they should implement measures to raise awareness of the harm caused by corruption. The Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights have taken on board all these issues, which are now included in the draft resolution. On behalf of the Rapporteur for Opinion and our committee, I thank the Rapporteur for this and hope we will be able to send a strong message to Member States about the zero tolerance policy the Assembly has towards corruption by adopting this resolution. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Zsolt. We now come to Madam Minister, who is with us. Madam Minister, we are very grateful to have you amongst us today. We welcome a friend of whom we know that the knowledge of the Council of Europe is great, and we also value your contribution to the work of the Venice Commission. Now, Italy is taking over the presidency of the Committee of Ministers, so I'm certain that the Council of Europe will yet again benefit greatly from your personal expertise. In this context, the Conference of Ministers of Justice on the role of restorative justice in Europe, which you are organizing in Venice on December 13 and 14, in my view, is certainly one of the highlights of your presidency, and I look forward to participating in this event in Venice. We are very eager to hear your views and exchange with you on how we can further strengthen our cooperation. So without any due delay, Madam Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President. And
microphone, please.
to Rome, to all the presidents of the national delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. I'm very glad to address the Permanent Commission of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe in this session, the first one under the presidency of Italy. This is a great opportunity for us to renovate our engagement and our commitment to the work of the Council of Europe and each of its organ and institution. As President Dimes have already said and announced, I'm glad to say that in a few weeks, under the Italian presidency, I will be honored to invite and to convene the Conference of the Ministers of Justice of the Council of Europe for a reflection and a work on a chapter that I consider very relevant at the national and international level on reparative justice in the criminal fields. In questa sessione dello
In this session of the Standing Committee of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, we are addressing a topic that is the bedrock of our democracies, combating corruption and the general principles of political accountability. I'd like to congratulate the rapporteurs for the work that's been carried out to present this very important document to us. The President of the Italian Republic, Sergio Mattarella, not long ago recalled that in a healthy democracy, and I quote, the institutions first and foremost must fulfill their duty to uphold the value of honesty. Now, institutions range, of course, from the mayor of a small municipality to supranational bodies such as the Council of Europe, including, of course, all representative institutions. It is now an accepted fact that any form of illegality and any lack of transparency, a prerequisite for the spread of corruption, will generate mistrust among citizens, will alienate them from participation in public life, will create a distance between citizens and institutions, and will thus undermine social cohesion. Corruption is a real betrayal of the principles underlying the rule of law, which is one of the three pillars indicated by the Venice Commission as an area of action of the Council of Europe: democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. The Venice Commission has been stressing this ever since its first report on the rule of law, published in March 2011. In exploring the implications of the concept of the rule of law, Lord Tom Bingham, in his 2010 book on the rule of law, points out inter alia the need for political leaders and public officials to be able to take the lead in the development of the rule of law, and that they must exercise the powers conferred on them in good faith, fairly, for the purpose for which the powers were conferred. End of quote. In essence, what our Constitution enshrines in Article 54, and this is an article which is far too often forgotten when it comes to the Italian Constitution, and the article states, citizens entrusted with public functions have the duty to perform them with discipline and honour. Now, in discipline and honour, there is no room for corruption and no room for opacity. There is no room for any form of illegality. All institutions within the Council of Europe, the Parliamentary Assembly, the Committee of Ministers, and bodies such as the Greco Experts Committee, the Manival, the Venice Commission, they've all played a fundamental role over the years to promote and help member states to adopt legislative measures and best practice as well, to bring their national systems into line with the best international standards. And this is done in a common commitment to protect and promote the ideals and principles that are their common heritage, and to foster their economic and social progress, as is stated in Article 1 of the Statute of the Council of Europe, adopted in London in May 1949. And one thing is for certain, where corruption flourishes, transparency is lacking, and economic and social progress is stifled. Corruption, as Pope Francis tirelessly repeats, is a cancer that, with the illusion of rapid and easy gains, in fact impoverishes everyone. There is no economic and social prosperity of the people where the poison of corruption is rampant. When building the regulatory system for preventing and combating corruption, Italy has paid particular attention to the guidelines from the Council of Europe. As we can see in the Greco report of December 2019, in this report, the satisfactory implementation of the largest number of recommendations addressed to Italy is acknowledged. That is, recommendations on the subject of criminalisation obligations arising from the 1999 Convention. Italy is ready to share in international fora its extensive experience in the fight against corruption, with the conviction that the only useful and effective approach to tackle global challenges is an approach based on multilateralism. In this regard, I'd like to recall the recent commitment made by our country under the leadership of Prime Minister Mario Draghi during the G20 presidency. The final declaration devotes special attention to the issue of anti-corruption. It reaffirms its central role in the agenda of the Global Forum. Among the documents approved was the adoption, supported mainly by Italy, of the high-level principles on corruption related to organised crime. Because as many investigations show, corruption is often the preferred means for criminal infiltration. We need to continue to provide our legal systems with all the instruments that can better equip us to combat a phenomenon that is serious in itself, as well as for links with organised crime. To this end, I'd like to say straight away that the Italian government intends, as of next week in fact, to proceed as soon as possible to make up for the delay in transposing the European Union Directive on whistleblowing. This is something that must be protected to encourage shedding light on any possible opacity in any structure, especially in the public sector. If we take a closer look at the subject of today's meeting, the attention paid by the Council of Europe to corruption, to the phenomenon of money laundering and tax evasion involving the holders of elected office and political functions, this is entirely worthy of support. In my view, such conduct undermines not only the credibility, but also the very integrity of democratic institutions. Those who carry out public functions take an oath, often a solemn oath, of loyalty and respect for the law and the Constitution. Women and men in the institutions, from an administrator of a small municipality to those with the highest political responsibilities, are the first to be called upon to respect these rules. And all are called to answer, including criminally, for violations committed in the exercise of their duties. At the same time, we should not forget the constitutional safeguards that assist the holders of elected public offices in terms of legal responsibility. These are prerogatives that guarantee democratic institutions, not privileges. Guarantees aimed at providing that in the dialectic of democratic life, allegations, even specious ones, of unlawful conduct can be used for the purposes of political gain. Thus, anti-corruption rules and respect for safeguards or guarantees must always be carefully calibrated. Italian legislation provides for the removal from office of members of parliament, but only after a final conviction. In the case of certain elected positions, it also prohibits those who have been convicted of corruption from standing for election. These measures have been examined by the Constitutional Court as well as the European Court, and they're considered as precautionary measures, not as sanctions. It is my profound conviction that our actions, when fighting against these phenomena, must be aimed above all at prevention, on which, and there's no coincidence here, Greco also focuses in promoting the integrity of parliamentary institutions, the transparency of their functioning, and the trust of citizens in political representation. Prevention requires rules, but it also requires cultural or educational and training related work. It is certainly useful to have systems of rules which, by contemplating specific cases of ineligibility or disqualification and cases of incompatibility with the parliamentary mandate, guarantee, while respecting the presumption of innocence, the integrity of legislative assemblies. Italy has embarked on this path with the adoption already in 2016 of the Code of Conduct for members of the Chamber of Deputies, and with the establishment of an advisory committee on the conduct of members of parliament. A similar path has been started by the Senate. These measures are designed to contribute to creating and spreading among parliamentarians and voters themselves a culture of legality and transparency, which is the most effective barrier to the spread of corruption. As the President of the Republic warned us in 2017, and I quote, "Corruption can only be fought through the firm, ethical and cultural involvement of everyone in society, aimed at affirming without hesitation or timidity the primacy of legality, since criminal enforcement is not exhaustive. Not only rules and enforcement instruments, therefore, but also a widespread and generalized cultural action capable of permeating through all the folds of social life. Rules are important, but they can only be truly effective if they are accompanied by a cultural renewal that passes first and foremost through educational agencies. In this important field, the Council of Europe can play a central, decisive role in this work of building a mentality. And we want to build a mindset that is resistant to attempts at corruption. And that's both technically and culturally. And the Italian presidency is ready, as always, to play its part. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister, for your very interesting thoughts that you shared with us. I will be very happy to be in Venice at the Ministerial. And I really hope that we can have a fruitful discussion down there. But again, the one and most important element is how can we join forces on so many issues that we have to tackle together under your presidency. But knowing your experience, amongst others, with the Council of Europe, we are very confident that we can do that together. May I ask our Vice President, Mr. Nick, to preside over the meeting, and Madam Minister, if you allow me, I will accompany you to the door. Not to get rid of you, but to the contrary.
Good morning, everybody, from here. So we go into the debate on this report. Does anybody want to speak? I have Tini Cox already on the list. Any others? Please make themselves recognizable. Tini Cox.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you very much, colleague Vlasenko, Sergei, for your report that you developed together with... I start again. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much, dear Sergei. Colleague Vlasenko, for the report that you developed together with the Rules Committee on this most important item. Because as several of our General Secretaries of the Council of Europe have warned us, Mr. Jagland, and now Madam Pacinovic-Buric, and all kinds of international institutions, if we do not combat corruption, then we allow that there is a cancer that can eat away our core values of rule of law, human rights, and democracy. Corruption is the enemy of these core values, and it is not a theoretical problem, as colleague Vlasenko shows in his reports. He brings together a lot of examples where politicians have let their actions be influenced by corruption, and that means that democratic process does not function in an appropriate way, and that rights are not protected in an appropriate way, and the rule of law becomes a cynical wording instead of being the guarantee, the guarantor of our way of life. The report of Sergei Vlasenko is a next step in our continuous combat against corruption. And I think, as the Madam Minister said, the Council of Europe can play and should play a leading role in this respect, especially with institutions as Greco and Manival. We are able to increase the awareness in our member states that if we do not combat corruption in an appropriate way, then we are harming ourselves and especially our citizens in a most aggressive way. I think it's important that in this report, the Council of Europe's Parliamentary Assembly calls on the national parliaments to improve the awareness at home that corruption is there. It's not something from other countries. It is relevant in all member states, each and every member state, and to ask national parliaments to take the necessary measures in order to make it possible that corruption, especially political corruption, is combated. So I think that the report is timely, and I think it deserves the support of the Assembly. There are some amendments that make it a bit more precise when action should be taken, and as the rapporteur already mentioned, this is indeed important because we have the presumption of innocence for everybody if politicians are as equal as ordinary citizens. But at the same time, we cannot wait until everything is arranged. There is a political responsibility next to the criminal responsibility. So thanks again, Sergei, for your report, and I hope that the Assembly will be able to endorse it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tini. Next speaker on the list is Madame Tris.
Oui, merci.
Yes. Thank you, Vice President. I also would like to thank Mr. Vlasenko for that report. You're absolutely right. We must set an example in fighting corruption because corruption eats away at democracy. As the Minister told us, it's absolutely vital to talk about this, to fight corruption in each and every one of our parliaments. Having said that, I do have a comment I'd like to make regarding the names listed in your report. Of course, I'm French, and this is why I noticed one of my colleagues' names in there. But it's more because this story hit the headlines. Siva Mayar, a serving MP in France. In fact, there were accusations levied because someone had stolen his identity. Someone who'd worked with this man back in the last decade, in fact, he'd taken his passport and used his identity. I just wanted to draw your attention to that, because sometimes there are cases which aren't absolutely clear. When it comes to this particular man, in fact, his identity was stolen. That's what it was all about. But nonetheless, thank you very, very much for your report. You're absolutely right. We need to fight corruption to the end.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Mereshko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be voting against this report and the draft resolution, and I feel the need to explain why. Of course, the topic is extremely important and very timely. There is no doubt about it. But at the same time, I believe that such reports should not be used as political tools in internal struggle to settle the scores with political opponents. In this case, the rapporteur, has mentioned in his report his political opponents in connection with the scandals Pandora and Panama, and at the same time conveniently has forgotten to mention his own political leader. If there is any doubt about this, I can send forward an article in The Guardian which mentions this case. So for this reason, I will be voting against. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Stier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to support the report and thank the rapporteur. Corruption, as we heard from Minister Cartabia, it's not just a question of money, it's a question of social ethics, and it's a question of the credibility of the democratic institutions. She also mentioned in that regard the avoidance of any manipulation of the fight against corruption for political purposes. In that regard, at the committee, we introduced some amendments. For example, that the trials should be concluded at a reasonable time, so that they are not used just to eliminate political opponents. And the rapporteur has accepted these amendments. They are introduced now in this text. I thank him for that. I think that is a contribution that has made this report even better, and I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no more. Miss Dienen. Miss Dienen. Okay, please.
Yes, thank you. On behalf of the Dutch delegation, I would like to commend the rapporteur and also the rapporteur for the opinion. I think this is an extremely important report, and as the report yesterday about the rules, the new rules on sexism, I think corruption is another thing where we as politicians really have to look at. So I will take it back home and will ask the Speaker of the Parliament and the Senate to see what we have already in place and whether this report actually needs adjustments in our own rules and regulations. So thank you.
Anyone else wishing to take the floor? Mr. Sadov?
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I think this report is really very important. But maybe in future we will be able to present to the Assembly one more report about political corruption, which is dealt with misusing the values of this very organization in the political purposes. From this point of view, I agree with Mr. Mereshko that, of course, we should fight against corruption. A couple of years ago, we saw what had happened in the Council of Europe. But much more dangerous sometimes to use the values in the political purposes. In this case, we can call it political corruption. And this attempt to stand behind the curtain of values of democracy, rule of law, and human rights created much more obstacles and problematic issues than corruption itself. That's why we have to fight corruption not only with this angle. We have to understand that corruption much more wider and much more problematic issues And from this point of view, of course, this is very essential, very important. And the experience of this organization gave us a lot of proofs of that. But at the same time, we should take into account the reality of this also is existing. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Schwabe?
So thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very important report, and thank you very much, Mr. Sedov, that you take the floor. But sorry to say, but you mix things with each other to hide something what happened, especially around Azerbaijan. You bring this organization here with corruption around Azerbaijan. You paid people here in national parliaments and in this Parliamentary Assembly, and this is something totally different from the discussion Mr. Mereshko starts here. For sure, we know it, that the accusation to be corrupt is used on the national level. We know it, and we have to make very clear what is the difference, and that we are careful. And because of this, we will speak about one amendment to slightly change maybe the wording in this report to make very clear that just an accusation of corruption is not corruption, and that does not mean you should not work anymore or whatever when it comes to this. At the end, nobody sits nowhere and do something. But the other thing is that we have corruption, we have to face corruption, and corruption, at the end, it destroys democracy and everything. If the people in our member countries think we are corrupt, then we lose everything, every power, everything to rule our country and this organization in a good way. Because of this, I just want to underline, for sure, we should be careful with the accusation of corruption, but this report is very, very important. And to say it's not the last one. We have to deal with this question, and it will never stop, but we have to speak about it. We have to implement control mechanisms. I just want to remind you that I'm working on a report in the Rules Committee about a kind of body or however to deal with this question in general. And I just want to say I support the report, understanding that there are some concerns, but I would really ask all our colleagues to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else asking for the floor? This does not seem to be the case, so the speakers list is closed, and I call the rapporteur, Mr. Vlasenko, to respond.
I would like to thank everyone who participated in that debate, even saying some things critical to the report. I agree with some messages that I received. First of all, I agree with Mr. Schwabe that is not the last, and that is not the last report, and we should have a new reports, and also we have to develop our fight against corruption. Yes, and we should look on that strictly. I would like to say I understand the situation with the national delegations whose politicians are mentioned in the memorandum, but as I've said, there are a lot of politicians involved in that, involved in the offshore schemes, and involved in corruption and so on. And I understand that every country don't want to be inside that, and every country don't want to be mentioned in that, and the political leaders don't want to be mentioned that. But we should be fair. If the person, even he is the leader of the country, had an offshore companies, we should say, yes, Mr. President, you have an offshore company, and you didn't declare that offshore company, which ruins the public trust, which ruins the belief of the people who are paying taxes in their own country. So that's the key question. I understand the situation with the French parliamentarian who lost the passport. I will double check that situation, and if it will be necessary, I will make an additional comment on that. But all the other information which are in the memorandum were double checked, even triple checked, and we made some corrections when we received any information from the national delegation. So we tried to be very precise in that case. I would like to stress once more that this report and this draft resolution is not about the legal things. That is about the ethical things. That is about the political responsibility. That's not about the presumption of innocence even, because we are talking about the ethical things. And one of the main proposals which are made in that draft resolution is the call to the national parliaments and governments which must improve or adopt the code of ethical conduct of public officials, saying that all the offshore companies should be declared, that should be transparent to the public. And if it would not be done, then the political responsibility should come. And I would like to quote once more the paragraph 5 of the draft resolution, saying that we are talking not about any case of corruption. We are talking about the situation where the alleged misconduct is sufficiently serious and the allegations are sufficiently credible. So we are talking only about these cases, not about all publications in media, in internet, whatever. I will quote once more, where the alleged misconduct is sufficiently serious and the allegations are sufficiently credible. So only in that situations, the political responsibility should come. So that's what the draft resolution is about. So not about the criminal responsibility, not about the civil responsibility, not about the administrative responsibility, only about the ethical and political responsibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next in line is the chairperson of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights, Mr. Cilevic. You have the floor.
Thank you, President. Indeed, this is really very important to keep in mind what is the subject of this report. It's not about criminal justice with regard to those guilty in corruption. This is about complementary measures, or interim measures, because it's actually well recognized also by the case law of the European Court of Human Rights that for public figures, for politicians, the level of protection of private life is lower than for ordinary people, let's say, who are not public figures. And this is, as many speakers pointed out, this is really crucial for credibility of the whole political system, of power. And we must do something in addition to criminal investigations, to criminal trials, because as we know quite well, they take long time. And this is why it is important that we have other tools, some other commitments which we as politicians voluntarily undertake. And here I strongly disagree with my good friend Tini Cox. Indeed, presumption of innocence is not applicable here. Presumption of innocence is a concept of criminal justice, and here we are not speaking about criminal justice, and of course we are not speaking about possible sanctions in the case of any accusation coming from political opponents and so on. Legally speaking, there must be prima facie evidence, so sufficiently reliable evidence that indeed these allegations are not completely ill-based. And in the meantime, in anticipation of criminal proceedings, some measures must be already applied, because indeed, if these credible allegations are in place, it would be completely wrong not to restrict whatsoever the ability of politicians to take also in future important political decisions which are likely determined by corruption interests. And also, in the cases when there is no criminal substance, this is not a criminal deed, but what politicians do does not comply with the ethical principles of good policy making, we also must do something even without these clear violations of criminal law or administrative law established by court. This is what this report is about. I understand that this might cause some discomfort in many colleagues, but we are all in the same boat. It's our common responsibility. This is not a prestige or reputation of some politician or some political party, but prestige of the European politics as a whole. This is at stake. And we must demonstrate our willingness to improve transparency, to improve responsibility. And this is what underlines the entire substance of this report. So I commend the rapporteur, Mr. Vlasenko, for his important work. And I urge you colleagues to support this report and the draft resolution as suggested by the rapporteur. Thank you, President.
Thank you, Mr. Silovic. The debate is closed and we shall now proceed to vote. I would like to remind you that only members of the Standing Committee are entitled to vote. We come to the amendments to the draft resolution in document 15403. The Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights has presented a draft resolution on fighting corruption, general principles of political responsibility, to which 3 amendments have been tabled. Amendments will be taken in the numerical order in which they appear in the compendium of amendments. I remind you that speeches on amendments are limited to 1 minute. Who would like to support amendment number 1? Mrs. Grande? Please, you have the floor.
Sì, grazie Presidente. Noi abbiamo presentato...
Yes, thank you, Vice President. I'm going to speak to all of the amendments, the thrust behind which is the same. We have submitted 3 amendments so as to highlight a key component of this report. We moved these amendments, the Italian delegation, to demonstrate that we support the report and the principles underpinning it. Nonetheless, we cannot not underscore the wording which is used. I mean, these are procedural matters, but in a number of paragraphs, the report mentions, uses the words credibly suspected. So credible suspicions of involvement in corruption schemes. And this leaves a lot of room for ambiguity, for interpreting what's actually happening, which not all states might be happy with. Therefore, what we're aiming for is to change the word suspicion so as not to act on based on suspicions to we should wait until there's a conviction. So we need a decision to be taken before the measures called for in the report are brought to bear. So suspicions, in the view of the Italian delegation, are not enough. This implies certain restrictions in place in parliaments in different countries. Next, the Code of Conduct. Of course, we should be implementing the Code of Conduct. We're going to support this, but this is rather quite different, a separate matter. We stand convinced that unless we change the text, unless we include the amendments we've moved, we fear that this report will be less effective because at the end of the day, it won't be properly implemented in tangible terms in the various parliaments. So that's the rationale for the 3 amendments Italy has submitted. So I'm really insisting on these 3 amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone speaking against? You will get the floor anyhow as chair of the committee. No? Okay. So Mr. Civic speaking against, if I get that right.
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. Apparently these amendments were not considered by the committee, so I cannot present the committee's opinion. But I would like to say that very similar, almost identical amendments were tabled when the committee adopted this report, and these amendments were rejected with a large majority. And very briefly, why? With all my deepest respect to our Italian hosts, still I would like to remind that the presumption of innocence is not applicable here. We are not speaking about criminal punishment here. And I would like to remind that in many other areas, presumption of innocence doesn't apply, and the decisions and the restrictive decisions are taken on the basis of credible allegations. For example, in taxation cases, in fiscal cases, you must prove that your income is legal, and you must prove the legal origin of your assets. Otherwise, you are punished. And this is a sort of reversal of burden of proof. And to the best of my knowledge, the Italian legislation currently in force also envisages the same provisions in the cases related to corruption, to mafia, and so on. So, in fact, it's quite contradictory, and to a considerable extent, it changes the very substance of this report. So we indeed, once again, we are speaking about additional measures, about complementary measures, about a sort of self-regulation, what we as politicians must do in addition to criminal justice, to administrative justice, to fight corruption among ourselves. So I regret to be strictly against these amendments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we will now vote on this. We will vote on this.
No, there's no opinion from the rapporteur. Sub-amendment? There's no need.
You want to table an oral sub-amendment?
No, normally not, but...
Okay. What is normal? Why don't we have... I think there was one person speaking against.
Yes.
But
one
what is...
in favor, one
we have absolutely no...
Normally not.
What is normal? What is...
You could allow, if you wish. All the sub-amendments you could allow it, but normally we should vote.
Well, we have all sub-amendments when we discuss in the plenary. So
no, but we are not in plenary.
I give the floor to Mr. Schwabe just to explain, just to clarify the situation.
I see the conflict, and I would not, let's say, I have some concerns as well about the wording, but I don't want to go so far to say you need a clear, I don't know, judgment or whatever. This can take sometimes 5 years in some country, and I think if we could find another way, we'll make clear that it's not just accusation, and I would propose something like clear evidence in the case, whatever it is. I know it's difficult as well, but to say if there is a clear evidence of corruption, then we should proceed with something what the rapporteur asked for. So this could be a kind of maybe agreement to say we don't say in the amendment definitively convicted. We could say in case of clear evidence of corruption. I think this could be a kind of bridge we can go together.
I think we're in a bit of a difficult situation, especially as these amendments were not adequately dealt with in the committee, and I'm not in a position to intervene in the factual debate, but given the political sensitivity of this issue, I think it would be helpful if we could come to a compromise that would allow this to be not voted with a narrow majority one way or the other. So is there any way we could bring the rapporteur, the movers of the amendment together for 5 minutes to see whether they can find a joint proposal, or would that be a total violation of the rules? Mover of the sorry. I think because of the political sensitivity of the issue, if there's agreement in the standing committee, I would suggest that maybe we do a recess for 5 minutes, recommend for Mr. Schwabe the mover of the amendment and the rapporteur and the chair of the committee to get together, whether they can find a joint position that we then could put to the vote. I would find that plausible, but even if it's bending the rules a bit, but given the fact that we did not have a chance for a full discussion of this in the Committee on Legal Affairs, I would find it an advisable process rather than having a vote which may then be in its result misinterpreted from the outside. Is that something, Mr. Cilevic, is that something that you and the rapporteur and the mover of the amendment could agree on? So we'll do a 5-minute recess. The four of you try to come up with a formulation that we then have in writing, and then we could potentially put that to the vote. Otherwise, we will vote on the amendments as they stand. Okay? 5-minute recess. Thank you very much. Okay, can I ask everyone to take their seats and the working group to finalize their discussion? Okay, can we resume? Please take your seats. Tini? Can everyone please take their seats? So we resume the vote on the amendments. I understand there was some productive discussion among those involved, and I think the agreement was for Mr. Vlasenko as a rapporteur to present a proposal. Mr. Vlasenko, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure that the agreement was as you mentioned, but yes, we discussed the oral sub-amendment to the Amendment 1, and the Amendment 1 with the oral sub-amendment will be as follows. The prosecution and the courts use legal means to suspend, to bar politicians, indicate when there are clear evidence of corruption and related offenses from holding public offices. Once again, the prosecution and the courts use legal means to suspend, to bar politicians in the case when there are clear evidence of corruption and related offenses from holding public offices. That was the proposal of Frank Schwabe, and I strongly support that.
Is that a proposal that the mover of the amendment could support?
No, because the idea of clear evidence could be seen in different ways, and again, that could be used internally for political parties, I mean, as a moral suasion between parties in your own party, but not in general. You cannot take away immunity from a politician because of a clear evidence. Clear evidence doesn't mean anything. Could be a picture and then an article on a newspaper that says something else. So for us, it's not acceptable, and we are worried of instrumentalization of this kind of clear evidence.
Okay, thank you. Just as a procedural remark from my side, I think it would be advisable that we only take amendments to the standing committee that have been properly discussed in the committee. But Tini?
As a point of order, Mr. President, I think you were creative in looking for a solution, and that is what we should do as an assembly and also as a standing committee. But we did not produce now a solution. There is still a difference between the mover of the amendment and the rapporteur. Would it be possible to postpone the vote on this report until January? Because I think there is an answer that can be found. We do not differ too much. I do not think that we will harm things if we postpone it for 2 months until January. We take a decision over there, and then hopefully a unanimous decision on this report. So that would be my proposal, if it is allowed.
Or we can do it in an hour after the current affairs debate, but not.
I think I have a lot of sympathy for this proposal, because as I mentioned before, I think there is not a material difference that should not be able to bridge in a proper discussion, which unfortunately the committee did not have a chance to have, and that deciding this by a controversial vote may send difficult signals one way or the other. I was thinking about whether it would make sense to move this the vote and either to this afternoon, or at least after the current affairs debate, if those involved think they can find a way to come up with a common wording. Otherwise, I think we have to resolve it by voting on the proposals that are on the table. Yes. Mr. Vlasenko?
Thank you. As a point of order, I would just stress your attention on what the head of the legal committee said. In the legal committee, we already discussed a very, very similar amendments which were presented as an oral amendments during the hearing of the Legal Affairs Committee. And these amendments were declined by a large majority of the committee. So the committee already looked on that issue. So we haven't formally the decision of the committee on that particular amendments, but very similar amendments already were voted in the committee, and they failed, as I've said, with a large majority. Thank you.
I think, as I see it, one of the problems why we don't get to a broader solution here is because we think the same about the substantial issue, but we're lumping together three different layers of decision makers, which is the criminal authorities, the parliaments, and the parties. And I think that the main disagreement is how much additional authority should be given to the legal authorities, and that maybe differ also from a more fundamental perspective from different national systems. I think we should be able to resolve that and come to a broader position. But if not, we do it the way we do it. We resolve it by a vote. So it depends a little bit on whether you think you will be able to work towards a compromise within an hour or so, and then we put it to the vote after the current affairs debate, which would be practical. But I'm not sure it's recommendable to postpone it to January. I don't know, Despina, do you want to?
Yes, thank you, President. Well, one thing, when Mr. Vlasenko refers to the legal committee meeting, and I think the chairperson can confirm it, we had many technical problems at this meeting, and the votes that took place that day were not, I'm afraid, taken in ideal conditions. So we cannot leave it, postpone it to January. If we postpone it to this afternoon, some of you may have left. Therefore, I think your proposal to have now the current affairs debate and take the vote after the current affairs debate is the best one. Unless, of course, there is no way of reaching any compromise. In that case, we can go to the vote straight. Let's listen maybe to the chair of the Italian delegation.
Sure, please.
Sì, grazie. No, io credo.
Thank you very much. Well, I do think that the idea that's just been put forward by Mr. Cox is perhaps the best idea so far that's been submitted. Now, the ideas that we have tabled for amendments, as I've already said, concern a proposed modification that's been put forward, and I think we can come to some sort of common ground here, but we can only do this if we have enough time to go through this. We're talking about amendment proposals. We've had the response from the rapporteur to these amendments. We've heard what he has to say, and he doesn't agree with them. And my fear is that we're going to have problems agreeing in the next hour. It's not going to work.
My proposal is let's vote. Let's vote. I think we will not find out. My idea was with the sub-amendment, for sure I understand the Italian delegation will be against the sub-amendment, but maybe at the end you will not be against the amendment because it's better than the sentence before. But I think we will not find out, and before we make it very, very complicated and procedural problems, we should put it to a vote.
The sub-amendment has to be supported by the author of the amendment. Otherwise, we cannot take it. So this is the problem. We cannot vote on the sub-amendment if the author of the amendment does not agree with it.
No, il subemendamento non.
No, but the sub-amendment does not resolve the situation, I'm afraid.
Mr. Vlasenko.
Thank you. So yes, we have some conversation, and my feeling is that these are two different approaches. The approach which is proposed by the mover of the amendment is talking about the criminal responsibility. The draft resolution is talking about not about the criminal responsibility, but about the political responsibility, which is totally different. And I think that we could vote right now because my feeling is that there will be no compromise because there are two different concepts. And we tried to find some compromise, but the mover of the amendment is against that. So I see no field where we should find the compromise. So you can ask the mover of the amendment, do they see any compromise? But my feeling is that there would be no compromise. So we could vote now on the amendments this way or this way, and we should move with the draft resolution to adopt, and that's it. Thank you.
Well, I would still hope that we could find a common ground here that would give, I think, a better message to the outside world if people are not willing to work towards a compromise, which I think is in the air. I cannot, of course, not force it. We can resolve it by vote. But I don't think it's politically the best way to deal with the situation on the sensitive issue. But then we need to have a clear proposal. And if I get it, did I get it right, Despina? Did I get it right that the mover of the amendment does not have to agree substantially with the sub-amendment, but they have to agree that the sub-amendment is put to the vote? Is that right?
Yes.
Except if Mr. Schwaber withdrew his sub-amendment.
Yes. So if
would that be a way that you at least formally agree that we may vote on the sub-amendment? Because I think that would be at least give the committee a fair chance to other than just rejecting your amendment in the first place.
Il subemendamento, ma noi
Yes, we can do the sub-amendment. We won't vote in favour of it.
Good. That's up to the new discussion. So we would procedurally we have an agreement that the mover of the amendment would not object to a sub-amendment being put to the vote, not without agreeing in substance. I think that would at least technically give us a chance to resolve this in a proper fashion. So what we would now need is a clear wording of a sub-amendment that I can then put to the vote. And that is the one that that Mr. Vlasenko has. Can you maybe repeat that? Mr. Vlasenko, could you repeat, just that people know what they are now voting on? So we would first vote on the sub-amendment put forward by the rapporteur.
The prosecution and the courts use legal means to suspend, to bar politicians in the case when there are clear evidence of corruption and related offenses from holding public offices. That's a clear wording.
So if everyone is in agreement, procedurally we put then this sub-amendment to the vote. We vote open. So who is in favor of the sub-amendment?
we need to check who has the right to vote.
Is blue don't have to? Blue cards don't vote, please. Only members. Excuse me. No blue cards. Blue cards. Is that?
No, it's not possible. Because it has been registered. Valerie, explain it.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, just to clarify, members who have been registered through the whole standing committee as chairperson of their delegation could no longer be replaced for a further sitting. So I'm sorry, Mrs. Aversdottir, but all members who are rapporteur who are here with a blue card can't vote, and they can't take back the right to vote of their chairperson who are now absent.
You want to ask for the floor, please? Please.
I am currently the chairperson of the Icelandic delegation, so my right to vote should not be taken away from me.
Can you clarify that?
It's what Valerie said.
This is not. I think I need some clear advice from the secretariat on this. This is a
I'm
mess.
afraid in the standing committee we cannot change. We cannot substitute in the middle of the meeting. This is a problem. Unless it was properly notified that today Mrs. Aversdottir was registered as chair of the Islamic delegation.
I believe you're talking to the secretary of my national delegation. I should have been properly registered as chair of the national delegation.
delegation, I think we have to allow.
There's an ongoing controversy about the right of one member to vote, and maybe we can.
You can move on with the vote. We will resolve the controversy later.
Can you please, Jacques Tini?
Yes, some of us didn't understand quite well the sub-amendment. It was said in a very, I would say, fast way, and some of us were not able to vote for the sub-amendments.
No, we have not concluded the vote yet. But there's a controversy about the claim of one member to vote.
Just if it's possible to repeat the sub-amendments, it would be.
We will, of course.
And after the explanations given by the secretary of the Icelandic delegation, Mr. Verstodir can vote. So we repeat now the vote, please.
Sorry, to be clear, I can vote?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Given that I think new members came in the room now, can we read out one more time the sub-amendment on which we vote before we do so?
Yes, and I will try to do it a little bit slowly. The prosecution and the courts use legal means to suspend, to bar politician in the case of clear evidence of corruption and related offenses from holding public offices.
Okay, so that is.
Who is against this?
Just for clarification, this is not the sub-amendment. This is the amendment with a sub-amendment. No, but there is a sub-amendment to your amendment. And we just vote now about this sub-amendment, and this is just three words.
The sub-amendment is, instead of the words definitely convicted, we should use the words in the case of a clear evidence. That's the sub-amendment.
Okay. Thank you for clarification. So, we vote on.
Who is against
Ingrid? Is it?
No.
Okay.
I'm just in favor.
Okay. So who is in favor of the sub-amendment by Mr. Schwabe? Who? I see some, again, I don't want to make this more, but I see again blue cards up. My briefing is only white cards are eligible to vote. Can we clarify this? Except Mrs. Sebastodia. I see blue cards there and there. I just want to make sure that we don't get in the mess here. Who is in favor? White cards. Cards.
No, I'm here in behalf of the Luxembourgish Parliament. I'm the chairperson from the Luxembourgish Parliament, so I'm not blue one. I should be white one.
Okay, sorry, I can't judge that.
She's right.
Okay. Okay.
Who is there? Sorry.
Who's this blue card over there?
I'm also the chairperson of my delegation. Of course. North Macedonia. North Macedonia.
Okay, maybe the Italians.
Okay, the Secretariat will clarify that. In parallel, we now have the vote. Okay, again, who votes in favor of the sub-amendment?
Mr. Tolstoy? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23.
Now we're to 23. Okay, 23. Who is against? 1, 2. Some people were waving their name tags. Was there a vote or was that not a vote?
Who is against?
Who is against?
Only
one. Okay, just make.
So the
sub-amendment is accepted. So then we move on the abstention. I'm sorry. 2, 3, 4. No, more go up.
6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 abstentions.
7. I see now this. Totally undisciplined. Okay.
4, 5, 6, 7.
I see 7 now.
7 abstentions.
At least 7 at the same time, which is always helpful for counting. So we then vote on the amendment as amended. Amendment number 1 as amended. Who is in favor? There's some movements up and down in the French delegation. You changed your vote a couple of times, so it was unclear who was voting what. Sorry. Again, everyone up who is in favor. Twenty-one in favor. Who's against? 2? Is it? 1 only. Okay. Abstentions? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 again. Huh? 7 abstentions. So amendment number 1, as amended, is accepted. We come to amendment number 2. Mrs. Grande already moved all 3 at the time, I think, or do you want to speak again on this?
Sì, anche qui si ripropone lo stesso tema.
Yes. For this amendment, well, we're discussing the exact same thing. What it says here is that there's suspect or suspected involvement in. We'd prefer to say definitively convicted of offences related to. That's our amendment.
Mr. Silevic.
Thank you, President. I would like to draw members' attention to the fact that the wording of the original text is actually almost identical, or practically identical, to the sub-amendment just supported with a big majority. It speaks about credibly suspected. So it's the same wording which was suggested. And when we speak indeed about codes of ethics, so ethics is something different from criminal justice. So this is why to wait until the final conviction by the court when we are speaking about ethical codes in the parliament, it doesn't sound logical. So in fact, we should act proactively, and we should have higher moral and ethical standards which are not defined by the court judgment, but are defined by our concept of parliamentary ethics. So I am against this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. The rapporteur, Mr. Vlasenko.
Yes, as I mentioned, we already looked on the similar amendment on the Legal Affairs Committee, but we could try to find some compromise, as we named that, during the arguing of the first amendment, and we could use the absolutely similar approach. And we could, for example, put an oral sub-amendment instead of the word definitely convicted of offenses. We could put the wording when there are clear evidence. So it will be totally the same wording as in the previous amendment. We can do this way, or we could reject that amendment. I'm happy with both options.
Okay, does this mean we have a proposal for a sub-amendment from you?
If it is possible, then yes, to find the compromise.
Okay, then we would you permit the vote on a sub-amendment?
No, perché comunque non soddisferebbe la nostra.
Well, in any case, no, this amendment does not, in fact, satisfy our request for amendment, so we cannot agree to it.
Okay, you do not agree for a sub-amendment to be put to the vote. Okay, then we put the amendment to the vote as it stands. Who is in favor of amendment number 2? 1. So this is now 4, 5, 6. 6 in favor. Who is against? $13. Who is abstention? So the amendment is rejected. We come to amendment number 3. Mrs. Grande, please.
Sì, questo emendamento.
Yes, this amendment aims to change the words internal pressure Unfortunately, the interpreter did not hear the suggested term. Very well, yes. When there are credible allegations.
I think that the translation was not necessarily complete. Can we make sure that we get what was really...
Sì, spiegavo l'emendamento.
Yes, as I explained, this is our amendment. We want to change the word internal pressures on politicians and put exert moral suasion on politicians. And at the very end, we should say when credible allegations become known, in keeping with the principle we already expounded on.
This was just explaining your amendment, not changing it. Did I get that right? Yes. Because it was a bit confusing. Okay. Then, anyone else ask for the floor? Mr. Cilevic, please.
Yes, thank you, President. I'm a little bit confused because the amendment suggests something different from what was just explained. So the text suggested by the rapporteur offers political parties to exert pressure on its members when credible allegations became known. Credible allegations. Amendments suggest to do this only when politicians are convicted. And in my view, it's already too late. When after several years, when the court convicted a politician, only then his political party starts to exert pressure. It is certainly too late. As I said, it's a matter of political ethics, and this pressure must be exerted much earlier. For example, in order to facilitate cooperation with the investigation at the court and so on. So in my view, it absolutely changes the very idea and is not compatible with the way how responsible political parties should act. Thank you. So I am strongly against. Thank you.
Thank you. What is the view of the rapporteur?
I agree with Boris Celevich and the decision of the Legal Affairs Committee, and I'm strongly against. Thank you. And no sub-amendments.
Okay. We put Amendment 3 to the vote. Who's in favor? 1, 2. Who's against? Twenty-two. Abstentions? 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 abstentions, so the amendment is rejected. We will then vote on the whole of the text, because that is not in my note, interestingly. We vote on the whole of the resolution as amended, and so who is in favor of the resolution as amended? Who is against? Because there was some movement up and down in this area where we're not clear who is voting what. 3 against. Okay. Then the abstentions? 5 abstentions, so the resolution is adopted. I congratulate the rapporteur on the completion of this work. Many thanks.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. President.
Dear colleagues, we will now continue with our current affairs debate under Rule 53 of the Rules of Procedures. I remind each and every one of you that the Standing Committee decided yesterday to hold a current affairs debate on the situation of migrants on the border of Poland and Belarus. The allotted time for the debate is 1 hour, no more. And immediately I give the floor to Pierre-Alain, to Mr. Frides, Pierre-Alain, to open the debate. You have 10 minutes in total. Pierre-Alain.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Following the request of Rick Dames and the Presidential Committee, which I'd like to thank for their trust, I went to Poland on the 19th and 20th of November, together with Anne-Marie Verolainen from Finland and Marie Rotonen, heads of committees, and this was part of a monitoring mission on the situation on the border between Belarus and Poland. I must remind you that Ms. Verolainen was a rapporteur in September when we had the debate on the situation on the border between Belarus, Poland, Latvia and Lithuania. I'm also the rapporteur on pushbacks on land and at sea. I should like to thank the Polish authorities and specifically the Polish delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly, specifically our colleague Mr. Boleczek, for their support and assistance which they provided as part of this urgent mission. Unfortunately, we couldn't access the border itself, but we did manage to meet the Polish Commission for Human Rights, various representatives of the Helsinki Committee, Amnesty International, various ambassadors, and specifically Grimeden, who is responsible for respect for fundamental rights at Frontex, the Minister of the Interior, as well as General Jukabacik, who's in charge of the border in Białystok, including other colleagues from the Polish delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly. All of these exchanges were frank and instructive. We learned a great deal about the situation, heard different, often divergent and contradictory views about the situation and solutions which should be adopted. On Friday 19th, we went to the border area. We were able to visit a border checkpoint. Unfortunately, we couldn't reach the border itself, nor could we see with our own eyes the situation, because we were stopped at the exclusion zone, at the start of the exclusion zone. The border area cannot be accessed, only by the Polish ombudsman. Even Frontex is not present in the area. Throughout this mission, we circumscribed the issues we raised to humanitarian ones, although some of the Polish officials we met often spoke about the political aspects of this issue. In our view, this is, to a large extent, an organized migratory phenomenon, actively organized by the Belarusian authorities, and their actions can be characterized as hybrid war. What we're focused on in the Migration Committee is the terrible fate of these men, women, and children who are being held hostage, who are falling victim to these political games which are being played at their expense. Thousands of people are being hidden in, are hiding in these forests, in these bogs. The situation is terrible. It's very cold. The sanitary conditions are deplorable. And it's only going to get worse as the winter wears on. There's snow. Temperatures are very low. They have no shelter. They're scared. President, the situation is very alarming. The inhabitants of bordering villages have stood in solidarity. They've exhibited humanity, but they can't work miracles. We've seen sordid actions being undertaken by one government. They've been pushed back on the other side. Dear colleagues, President Lukashenko stands behind all of this. That's patently obvious. Indeed, other countries are collaborating, for instance, by sending planes to Minsk. Yes, Poland is under attack and has condemned all of the actions behind this. Indeed, some migrants who are there at the border are probably economic migrants who want to move on and not just stay in Poland. Nonetheless, Poland must respect international asylum rules. It needs to look at each specific case. regardless of whether the person crossed the border irregularly, regardless if the person in question was instrumentalized for political purposes. It's unacceptable to deem a migrant ineligible for the right to asylum. This is a universal right. They should be able to lodge their applications, and these applications should be considered in keeping with the laws on the books. This is a very complicated situation. There's deadlock, but people are dying. To date, according to the information we have, 11 people have lost their lives, and this might be just the tip of the iceberg. In the short term, we suspect that the worst case scenario might come to be. We see men, women, and children who are absolutely exhausted physically and mentally. We saw many harrowing scenes, including at border checkpoints. The Polish officers working there are doing an outstanding job. Some of them are at the end of their tether as they're working in very difficult conditions. We met with families, including a Kurdish Iraqi family. There was a man there. He had 5 children between the ages of 3 and 14. And this family was treated with dignity by the Polish officials, having undergone terrible ordeals. We saw other families, for instance, a woman who was pregnant. She lost her child and lost a lot of blood as well because of the inhuman conditions she was subjected to in that forest. Her husband was absolutely devastated to learn that his wife was probably going to die. He had his wife with him. She was pregnant, as I told you, other children. Unless he was absolutely desperate, he wouldn't have embarked on this perilous path. The border region is now in a state of emergency. However, the state of emergency can only run to the start of December. Legislative amendments are being discussed in the Parliament, and an exception might be granted. We believe that we need to restore access to the border. We need to do this as soon as possible so that the HCR can access the area. We must support Poland using best practices to ensure we uphold migrants' rights and offer them the best possible protection, especially the most vulnerable, women and unaccompanied children in particular. If necessary, we might need to open a humanitarian corridor. Time is of the essence. These people are in dire straits, and therefore we must act swiftly without taking into account other considerations. We need to protect them. We should encourage all member states to stand in solidarity with Poland. If need be, they should also stand in solidarity with Baltic countries if the crisis persists. We should be prepared to receive these migrants in our countries. We need to reach out and lend a hand to these poor people so that other countries do not fall victim to this phenomenon, specifically Poland. We were very moved by what happened in Poland, what we saw in Poland. Similarly, it was similar to what I felt when I visited the camps on the island of Lesbos. Colleagues, our values are at stake. We see barbaric acts being committed. We see injustice. This is at odds with the values of the Council of Europe. Thank you for your kind attention.
Merci, Pierre-Alain.
Thank you, Pierre-Alain.
Give the floor to members, where we will first start to give the floor to the representatives of the political groups. Now, I have on my list Mr. Yildiz, Mr. Mularczyk, Madame Eversdottir, but I do not see the political groups. I see Tini waving. Are there any political groups asking? I see Emanuelis. Yeah, first we see Tini. I see, Emanuelis. I see PP. I see Jacques. I see Tolstoy. I don't suppose he's in a group yet. I see Suna. I suppose that is for, sorry. So that's socialist. I don't see any conservatives. Are any conservatives? Jolt. Mr. Mularczyk is for the conservatives. Okay, I'll take him in different order, no problem. I will start with the first I saw, which is Mr. Mularczyk. Arki, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Mr. Pierre-Alain Frides for his presentation, for his report, and I would like to thank for his visit in Poland. I think we need to see this situation, this migrant situation, in the big pictures, what's going on now in the Polish-Belarus border. We need to understand that in Belarus we have the regime, Lukashenko regime, and he lost the last election, and now he's create his revenge because European Union put a sanction on his regime. So as we speak, dramatic events are taking place on the border between Belarus and Poland. Thousands of migrants are being pushed by the police and secret service of the Lukashenko regime on a barbed wire protecting the borders of a sovereign state. These people have been flown into the Belarus capital in an orchestrated manner from Iraq, Syria, and other countries in difficult situations, lured by a false Lukashenko promise of a better life in Europe. They are then placed in buses by Belarus servicemen and taken to the border where they are pushed against the fences and forced to attempt crossing or camp in the cold in the nearby swamps and forests. Thousands of women, men and children are used as live munitions in a Lukashenko attempt to destabilize the situation on the border with Poland, Latvia, Lithuania and the European Union. This is the origin of what is becoming a serious humanitarian and security crisis on the EU eastern border. In this context, we must remember who is the perpetrator, who is the target, and who are the innocent victims. Let us not fall into the trap of confusing the roles and creating a false narrative. Poland, Latvia, Lithuania is and will continue to protect its sovereignty and its borders against any potential attacks and threats. This should be clearly stressed and, as we believe, well understood by all member states of the Council of Europe, especially in the context of relatively recent experience of hybrid attacks in some parts of our continent. At the same time, let me assure you that the human rights of the persons cynically used by the regime in Minsk are at the center of our attention. Poland has always abided by its international human rights and humanitarian obligation. Our border guard and police, working for several months now under consistent pressure and in extremely difficult conditions, do their utmost to observe very strictly all their human rights obligations. We are convinced that the priorities of protecting Polish and European security as well territorial integrity can and should be fully reconciled with the observance of the highest standards of human rights protection of all the persons who find themselves on Polish territory. Let me assure you that Poland is and will continue its efforts in this regard. We note and welcome the interest of the Council of Europe, including Commissioner for Human Rights and the Parliamentary Assembly, in this situation on the border with Belarus. Commissioner Mijatovic visited Poland last week and could witness the whole complexity of the situation on the ground. As she stressed after the visit, the dealing with the current situation should not just fall on Poland's shoulders. This is the European issue which requires a human rights concert response based on solidarity and European values and standards. In this spirit, we believe that the Council of Europe and its member states have a role to play inter alia through a strong and decisive call on the Belarusian authorities to cease the gruesome activities conducted on the border with the EU and allow the innocent migrants to return to their homes as soon as possible. Finally, I think and I appeal to our colleagues from all the delegation. Council of Europe should actively engage in this situation to prevent this trafficking innocent people from their home countries to Belarus. We are convinced that in this situation we should work together as a Council of Europe to once again prove our relevance and ability to tackle difficult situation on our European Poland, Latvia and Lithuania border. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arki. We now move to the representative of the social group. Suna, you have the floor. 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. The events that we see unfolding at the borders of Belarus are a humanitarian crisis. And we must do our utmost to ensure that the human rights of these migrants are upheld and respected. And we must do as much as we possibly can to assist those in need at the border. But I would put to you, as the wife of a Polish man, that it is also very important that Europe steps up and shows solidarity with Poland in a way that Poland can accept and believes in. Because I am distinctly aware of a rather unsettling mistrust that Poland has towards the rest of the continent based on their history, based on the history of the Second World War. Poland has felt abandoned by Europe during times of conflict. So there is a certain type of mistrust towards the solidarity that Europe will show them when they now, in a certain way, feel under attack. And I think it's very important that the leaders in Europe take this very seriously and try to build trust with the Polish authorities and with the Polish nation so that we can deal with this problem in a humanitarian and appropriate way in European solidarity. And I think if this is done in a sensitive way, with respect and reference and deference to history, it could be a unifying moment for Europe. It could be a way to bring Poland closer to its European allies again, especially, for example, in the European Union. I know we're not sitting there right now, but should Europe deal with this problem in solidarity with Poland, with respect to the history that has already taken place, I think we will have a much more successful resolution of this problem. And we might even have a more friendly relationship between Poland and the rest of Europe as a result. I know that my husband feels very worried about what is happening at the border. He lives in a different country from his own, but he feels like these are very worrying signs. He is seeing the military of Russia moving closer to the border. And there are worries that this will be used as an excuse for an escalation of violence. So there are worrying signs that we should be considering when we discuss this very humanitarian crisis, but we should also look at it as an opportunity to show European solidarity, to be able to come together, solve the humanitarian crisis, but also defend Europe as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Suna. We now move to the representative of UAL. Tini, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And let me first say thank you very much to our colleagues Frides and Viro Laiden for doing the fact-finding mission to the border area between Belarus and Poland at your request and request of the Presidential Committee. I think it is important that we are at the spot when things go out of hand, and things are going horribly out of hand. In this case, we have seen in the past months a sharp increase of migrants from countries like Iraq and Afghanistan via Belarus in the direction of Council of Europe member states. I think the president of Belarus has not made it a secret that he has opened his country to these migrants in order to put pressure on the European Union over sanctions imposed by the European Union to Belarus. And I think it should be said clear by the international community that it's unacceptable to use the needs of migrants, the needs of human beings, to achieve political goals. And I think the international community should stand united in this respect. Belarus is a member state of the United Nations and has to respect international law, and one of these international laws regards the Refugee Convention, and I think that it's now playing with its obligations. So it's important that we make a clear message to the government in Belarus that it is unacceptable and it should end. And it should end immediately, because you do not use human beings to achieve your goals. The member states of the Council of Europe who are directly confronted with this, especially Poland, but also the other Baltic states, they claim, and they rightfully claim, that they have the right to protect their sovereignty, and that they are attacked in one way or another, in a hybrid way, by a neighboring country, and that they are entitled to defend themselves against such an attack. And that is, of course, true. But at the same time, this right to protect your sovereignty does not create the right not to live upon your obligations under international and European law, and that is happening as well. We have seen that there are people are forced back who are trying to enter member states of the Council of Europe to apply for asylum. And I think, and this is a huge responsibility for not only the bordering member states of the Council of Europe, but for the whole Council of Europe, that we cannot walk away from the obligation under the Refugee Convention that everybody who claims to seek for asylum should have the right to an individual assessment of the protection. And as Pierre-Alain Frides states properly, that the assumption is realistic that quite a lot of those who now would like to apply for asylum, in the end will turn out not to be under the protection of the Refugee Convention, and should then leave the territory of the country that they entered in. But until that is made clear, all these people have the right to have an individual assessment, and I think it's our obligation as a Council of Europe to help these member states to live up to their obligations, because I understand completely that countries like Poland say that it's not fair that they should take all the burden of a conflict that is not really a conflict regarding Poland, but it's regarding the whole of Europe. So I think that what is needed now, one is protection of those people who are in the border area. Secondly, the willingness of all involved states, solidarity of all European member states of the Council of Europe, the readiness to respect international and European law, and the need to reflect on how to protect the Refugee Convention in the near future. We are celebrating 70 years. The future is now at stake. But once again, a call to Belarus to respect its obligations, but also to the member states of the Council of Europe to do the same with regard to our obligations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tini. We now move to EPP, Emanuel Zingeris. Emanuelis, you have the floor. 3 minutes, please. The counter. I mean, where's my counter here? Aha, voila. Go, Emma.
Thank you, dear Speaker. Thank you for remaining every time those 3 minutes during the last 4 years. I would like to say that conflict created artificially by Belarusian dictator, and dear Tini, please don't stop to call him president, but it was not free and fair election. It was a created coup against Belarusian people who assembled millions of them in the streets of Minsk, Grodno and other cities, saying no. And they elected Tsikhanovskaya and all political parties. Can you imagine? All political parties' leadership is now in prison. So I'm calling now, looking to my social democratic friends here, calling to Christian Democrats, calling to leaders from Liberal Party, especially Jurik Dems, to be involved in liberation of those dismantled political parties inside of Belarus. We are responsible in the European political family for the fate of those incredible brave men and women who are now in prison. Can you imagine, Mr. Dems, 888 political prisoners now tortured inside of political prisons on the territory of Belarus. And I will switch to the crisis created by artificially on our borders for the reason that we are protecting social democrats, we are protecting conservative, we are protecting Christian Democrats and other parties inside of Belarus. We are punished for protection of democracy in Belarus for this huge immigration crisis. And we should understand that dictator who usurped the power trying to change our policy line towards him, and then he will stop. But having in Vilnius opposition members from Russia, having in Vilnius opposition members from all parties, not only Madam Tsikhanouskaya in Vilnius, who are now under our umbrella of free country of European Union, NATO, we will not change our policies. So can you imagine, Ulrich, when you are bringing the people who are artificially invited to Belarus through agencies, illegal agencies of Mr. Lukashenko in the trap, now are forced by Belarusian army to the border. And if they are refusing to go, they are under punishment. So they're forced. It's not the same like the immigration waves in the south of Europe, here in Italy, in distinguished countries like Greece and Spain, who are naturally flow of immigration. And we still should be, of course, related to our obligations to the international conventions. And it's artificially created huge traffic of immigration trying to change our policy and not force us not to support democracy in Belarus and probably democracy in Russia. So from my point of view, trying to say thank you for creation of resolution who were supported from all of us, last resolution about immigration crisis, but we should understand that this immigration crisis is politically, artificially created, and that is the true. We should support the lives of those poor immigrants, absolutely yes, but we should settle clear measures to help Belarusian democracy, being in the heart of Europe, to be supported by all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emmanuelis. We now move to ALDE. Jacques, vous avez la parole.
Jacques, you have the floor. Thank you very much indeed, President. I'd like to thank also Pierre-Alain Frides for his report, which is always both fascinating and very powerful indeed. I was very struck by what you had to say, in fact, and I'm certainly sensitive to the fact that Europe and the European Union has remained united behind Poland during this very difficult period, which isn't yet over, in fact. Now, this isn't the first time that there has been this sort of exploitation of the misery being suffered by refugees from a political point of view, even though Poland, this isn't the most brutal and violent example. Now our Italian and Romanian colleagues and other colleagues have fully experienced difficulties related to this, including our Spanish colleagues, with regard to the migratory flows that have been experienced from the east. Now, let's not go what's happened with, of course, Turkey and Morocco. Not long ago, there were 8,000 migrants that joined the coast within 24 hours after being given the green light by Morocco. Now, I'm simply mentioning this because later on this afternoon, we're going to be celebrating the 1951 Convention on the International Protection of Refugees. And this enshrines fundamental principles which are currently being questioned. That is non-discrimination, non-criminalization, and no lack of refoulement, pushback. And there are also minimum standards that are set out with regard to dealing with refugees. Unfortunately, in light of the example of what's happening in Belarus, the principles of these convention are being called into question. The 1951 convention, unfortunately, is ill-equipped to deal with this sort of a instrumentalization. Now, what should we do? I don't think we should call into question the principles underlying the 1951 convention. We should ask ourselves to what extent we can draft and implement additional provisions for situations of humanitarian and crisis and urgency. Now, we have one very unfortunate example. That is the fact that the European Union itself has set up mechanisms to deal with such crises. I'm thinking here in particular of the directive from 2001 on temporary protection. This was adopted, in fact, at a time when Iraqi and Syrian refugees were streaming in. Now, this was never implemented, in fact. There's also something that was planned by the Dublin mechanism, that is a sort of rapid alert mechanism, the preparation and crisis management mechanism. Well, all these were decided, but unfortunately, they've never been activated. So we can not but fail to note that as a result of this lack of action or an ability to be effective with these instruments, we at the Council of Europe need to underline the importance of taking multilateral action within the Council of Europe and within the European Union, and we want to ensure that there are effective and additional mechanisms that can cope with this serious crisis situation. I think this is the lesson we can draw from this and the price we have to pay if we want to ensure that we can continue this sort of common fight, and that is international protection of refugees as set out in the 1951 Convention of Geneva. Thank you. Thank you, Jacques. Let's now give the floor to members. The first member I have is Per Tolstoy. You have the floor.
Thank you, President. The humanitarian situation is indeed terrible. Mr. Friedrich told us all about that. Unfortunately, it's not the first time. Why did these people become refugees? Who is responsible for this? Who pillaged their countries? Who bombed their countries on the pretext that they would introduce democracy there? How can you, colleagues, say that this situation can't be compared to what's happened in the south of Europe, in Turkey, in Cyprus, in Morocco? How can we not compare it? These are the very same people. It's a business, in fact. A business. Transporting migrants, for example, from Belarus to Germany. It's been going on for years. Poland there would be Polish people driving migrants from Belarus to Germany. Belarus has been boycotted by the EU, and hence we have the situation on our hands. Polish border guards are not just pushing people back into Belarusian territory. These border guards, whose humanism Mr. Friedrich just told us about, they've in fact water blasted them, and it's absolutely freezing. They've also used tear gas on these refugees. This is what these Polish border guards are doing. They've also beaten up women and children along the border line. It's not Lukashenko's regime that's doing this. It's an EU member state that's engaged in these activities. That's something you need to know about. The only way to resolve the situation is direct talks with the president of Belarus, President Lukashenko, who was lawfully elected. There's no other way out of this situation. No other puppet policies applied to the situation on the Belarus-Poland border can help to tackle the situation. I hope you can understand that, at least the majority of you. These politicized characterizations of Belarus in this situation do not help us to attend to these poor people out there in the forest. Colleagues, yesterday, 27 migrants lost their lives in the Channel. They died in freezing waters. No one's talking about Macron or Boris Johnson being responsible for their deaths. Everyone's talking about Lukashenko. We should avoid politicizing this issue. Our organization should be trying to save people, to protect human rights. After all, these are matters of life and death. This is what Mr. Friedrich told us. Our organization shouldn't be involved in sticking political fig leaves over these problems. This does not inch us any closer to resolving this crisis. Thank you.
Merci, Pierre. We now go to the next on my list, who is Ahmedidis. Ahmed, you have the floor. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Indeed, 3 minutes is more than enough. Indeed, as emphasized in our latest resolution on this matter, we shared as Turkey concern Poland, Latvia and Lithuania on irregular migration, because we face for a decade the similar problem. Just this year we apprehended more than 138,000 irregular migrants. Of course, the Belarusian approach cannot be tolerated. It is sad to see that necessary measures are not taken in terms of preventing the illegal passing of third country citizens to the territories of these 3 countries. This crisis may wear down the international protection system, which originates from the Convention relating to the status of refugees on its 70th year commemoration. We will talk about it later. However, Mr. Chairman, dear colleague, we shared information with these 3 countries, and we declared our sympathy, solidarity, and we warned Belarusian authorities on this. We offered some assistance on expertise as a country dealing with some issues and support of material. However, I equally blame those in this organization, in our member countries, who are trying to make parallel between the Syrian refugee issue and this issue. It is either ignorance to the worst humanitarian crisis since Second World War, the most tragic hot conflict, and to the plight of these people, or it is a pretext to legitimize the pushback practices of some countries. We cannot tolerate that standards are applied to EU countries in some way and non-EU countries in another way. To help decrease the tension, of course, Turkish Airlines made some measures, stopping flights reducing flights and issuing tickets for citizens of some countries, and also suspending the code sharing agreement with Belarus. Upon the checks, it was seen that the number of those who went to Belarus and who didn't return by Turkish Airlines is just 200. It seems that they are flying with other airlines from their countries. Turkey hopes that this will be solved in a legal and legitimate way soon, and is ready to help these 3 countries to cope with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. We now come to Alexander. Alex, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll try to quickly answer 2 classic questions. Who is to be blamed for this artificially created migration crisis, and what is to be done? I would call this situation double instrumentalization. By this I mean that this crisis is used as a political tool, political instrument by Lukashenko and his regime against Poland. But at the same time, Lukashenko himself is not independent. He is under control of the Kremlin. And he is used in its turn as a political tool, as instrument by Putin to punish Poland for its firm support of Ukraine and for its solidarity with Ukraine. This is obvious to me. What is to be done? By the way, I recognize this handwriting by Putin. I vividly remember when Russia invaded Crimea, at one of his press conferences, Putin had dared to describe his tactics. He said, first we will put women and children, and behind them will be our troops. This is exactly what he is doing in this situation against Poland. This is the bottom of cynicism and it's also obvious. What is to be done? I think if we want to stop this crisis, we should use more sanctions, not symbolic sanctions, but serious sanctions against Putin and his regime. And I can assure you, if we start using these serious sanctions, this crisis will stop. What can be done to Belarus, to free people of Belarus? First, what had happened to the ad hoc commission on Belarus? Where is it? We should create it immediately. And we also can support Belarus by sending the draft of the constitution which was prepared, which was drafted by the free people of Belarus in exile. We should send it to the Venice Commission. So these are steps which can help Belarus, and these are steps we can stop this migration crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. We now move to our next speaker, Leima. Where is Leima? Okay. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. First of all, I would like to thank our colleagues who went to Poland, Pierre-Alain Friedrich and others, for their work. In our resolution in September, our Parliamentary Assembly has already expressed its concern by the unfolding situation of hybrid attacks by the Belarusian authorities, resulting in increased migration and asylum pressures at the Belarus border with Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. And our Assembly has condemned any instrumentalization of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers by states for political purposes. Nevertheless, the situation of migrants on the border with Belarus is getting worse and worse, and we fully acknowledge this, we understand this. We condemn in the strongest terms inhuman actions of Belarus regime for putting people's lives in danger, breaking international law, disregarding the fundamental human rights to which Belarus has committed, and threatening the international security. The instrumentalization of human beings for political purposes must stop now. In order to avoid tragedies and prevent a humanitarian crisis on the territory of Belarus, we should call on competent international actors to engage with Belarusian authorities in order to organize humanitarian and medical assistance for the third country migrants who are currently in the territory of Belarus. I would like to stress this, in the territory of Belarus. It is of crucial importance that relevant international organizations help illegal migrants to return to their countries of origin. Again, I would like to stress this, to return to their countries of origin, provide them with necessary assistance, and take active steps to prevent the flow of illegal migration across the European Union borders. And finally, Russian authorities, the Kremlin, should stop supporting Lukashenko. Lukashenko is not a legitimate president. And to my understanding, it's not only my opinion, International Criminal Court in The Hague is crying for him. Thank you.
Thank you, Leima. We now go to Kimmo. Kimmo, you have the floor.
Mr. President, first of all, I would like to state that it is since last September, this is the 5th time we are discussing here about Belarus, and there is reason for that. The situation on the border, this is 2nd time we are discussing our assembly, plenary assembly meeting and standing committee meeting on Belarus. What is very clear for all of us, it's not primarily a migration problem. It's a security problem, very clearly, and more a humanitarian problem, serious humanitarian problem. I have visited on the border of Lithuania and Belarus a few months ago, and I interviewed with some of those migrants who crossed the border illegally. I asked them, why you are here? What's your aim? What's the process? They are saying, we have heard on the countries where from they came, that now there is a door open to Europe via Minsk. Go to Minsk and you have an access to Schengen region and Schengen area. And they really clearly stated that we are not interested in asylum here in Lithuania or here in Poland, our aim is to go to Central Europe, to Germany, to UK, to France, etc., etc. That's their aim, very, very clearly. So we are in very serious situation also in terms of your whole European Union, because it's our common European Union border. And that's why this is a very serious matter for us to consider. I want to state that now there are around more than 7,000 immigrants who cross the border illegally in Lithuania, Poland and Latvia together, and we don't know how many there are actually in Belarus, maybe close to 10,000. The Belarusian press reported a week ago that there are 7,000 of them. How is their situation? What is their situation? The WHO director, regional director of Europe, has said that 60% of those people on the border need help, medical help, immediately. They are thirsty. They have obviously cold. They are hungry, and they are obviously lost. Very many of them are very much lost. And I would like to state very strong way, these people actually are the first victims of this Belarusian hybrid war. These are the first victims, and we should recognize that one. So what should we do? What should we do? There are a few points, and I already want to take them very quickly. First, notwithstanding about the responsibility of Belarusian, we cannot as a civilized people, as a member of the Council of Europe, we cannot abandon these migrant people. We cannot leave them there. The minimum is obviously to give access for organizations, humanitarian assistance organizations, to help those migrants. That's the minimum. Secondly, we must show strong solidarity with Poland, Lithuania and Latvia. And with technical assistance, humanitarian assistance. That's absolutely clear also. Thirdly, obviously, we must clearly demand Belarusian authorities to stop utilizing, instrumentalizing migrants in this way, what's happening. And that's full responsibility on those terms is obviously on that side. And to try to create certain type of dialogue between Belarusian authorities and obviously neighboring countries and in broader process. I know that actually I'm heading the process of inclusive national political process in Belarus as a rapporteur here in Assembly. Unfortunately, the dialogue seems to be, by this type of situation, going further and further, but that's the only thing what we at the end can do. Let's try to create a basis for proper dialogue to solve this problem. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Kimmo. We now head out to Nikos. Nikos, where are you? Up to my right.
Thank you very much.
3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, dear colleagues. We all agree in this room that what is happening on the border separating Belarus from Poland is chaotic, to say the least. From a political point of view, this is deplorable. But what is even more tragic is the toll on human life and suffering. Migrants and refugees cannot be exploited for political gain, whether this is happening in Poland, Greece, or Cyprus. Refugees and migrants cannot be used as pawns for whatever reason, and they must certainly not be abused or mistreated. Europe must strike a fair balance between meeting humanitarian needs and protecting national interests. Thank you very much.
Nikos, we come to our last speaker for 3 minutes. Jolt, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I would like to thank our rapporteur for the introduction, Mr. Frides. I would like to thank all those who have contributed to this discussion. I would like to quote our colleague from Iceland, Suna, who said that this is an opportunity now to rebuild the solidarity with Poland. And I would like to draw your attention that probably this is the most important aspect at the moment, because Poland is under attack. And some people try to use this tragedy to attack Poland and find a good minute to demonstrate that the Polish authorities are responsible. We have just witnessed it, that they are the responsible. They are water gunning and tear gassing and attacking. I believe this is ridiculous to attack Poland at this moment and to say that they are not humanitarian enough, not sensitive enough for the refugee problem. This is the real question, dear colleagues. Do we understand that there is a country is attacked in the most nasty way you can imagine, or not? And if we understand that this is a very serious form of attack on a colleague or a member state in the Council of Europe, then we will be able to find the right answers. But if we don't understand the character of the challenge, we may be misled. So I think this is a new situation. We have never experienced that human bodies, mothers, children are used for a hybrid war. We have never experienced this. It had nothing to do with the Turkish precedent. There is no parallel. This is the first in history when a state organizes human beings to attack another state, push them ahead. And we need to look at this from this aspect. Yes, we have to find the right balance between humanitarian dimensions and security dimensions, but when we solve the problem, yes, we have to, because we are talking in the end about human beings. But this is fundamentally a security challenge. And for that reason, we need to use appropriate means. So I would draw your attention to instruments in the fight in the field of security which have been utilized in the past years. Now we are talking in a different way about physical fences, don't we, than we did in the last 6 years. We seem to support the physical fences in this case. And we are now donating support for these countries to build their physical fences. Is the fence okay or not? We believe in Hungary that this is an important component of the security dimension of the solution. Fences must be built, and we need to support them. And the European Union should give up the approach that they don't give appropriate financial donation and support and help in this regard. We have, in Hungary, we have invested 2 billion euros to build the physical fences, which is an important component of the legal solutions. And then we need to have, obviously, a legal protection system. And you have mentioned many important components of the solution. I have to stop, I see. But I would like to reiterate that this is the right moment to rebuild normality, solidarity, and our elementary reflexes for self-defense with the solidarity towards Poland. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joel. It is obvious that this is an item that will not disappear from our agenda in the coming weeks and months. And I do believe that it is our duty to try to at least contribute to find a solution. Thank you for the current affairs debate. We now go to the joint debate of legal affairs and human rights, migration, refugees and displaced persons. We will go a little bit over time this morning, dear colleagues, a little bit over 1 hour to at least have a first part being done. The first report that we will debate is from the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights. The second one is from the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons. And the first will be presented by Lord Richard Balfe, and the second will be presented by Pierre-Alain Frides. Then the second report from the Committee on Migration, because it's number 3, will be presented by Lord Leslie Griffiths. But above all, let me warmly welcome in this context Madame O'Hara, UNCHR Director for International Protection, who joins us today to celebrate this important moment, namely the 70th anniversary of the 1951 Geneva Convention. Not surprisingly, UNHCR has been involved closely in the preparation of this report. Dear Ms. Madame O'Hara, at the Assembly we greatly value the work of UNHCR, with actions taken in the most challenging context to save lives of millions of refugees and displaced persons worldwide. I'm looking forward to having you taken the floor during the debate. But we have to start by calling Lord Balfe to present the first report. You have 10 minutes in total, which you may divide between presentation of the report and reply to the debate. And may I ask John Howell to come, Vice President Howell, to take over the meeting. Lord Balfe, you have the floor.
Thank you, dear President, dear colleagues. When the motion behind this report was tabled in 2019, we were celebrating the 70th anniversary of the Geneva Conventions. The 1949 Geneva Conventions codified international humanitarian law, that is, the law of the conduct of war. International humanitarian law was codified because of the awful lessons learned during the Second World War, the most murderous and destructive conflict, though not the worst in history. That was the First World War. The overwhelming desire to avoid future conflicts by preserving peace with and between nations was the motivation for the UN to adopt the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. A declaration, incidentally, that was strongly influenced by Eleanor Roosevelt, who was Truman's nominee as US representative at the United Nations. In Europe, 1949 was the year in which the Council of Europe was founded, and in 1950 the Council adopted the European Convention on Human Rights. When the Council of Europe and the European Convention on Human Rights have played an inestimable role in maintaining peace and stability on the European continent, armed conflict has not gone away, and military intervention is still an instrument of national policy. Armed conflicts, in other words, still exist. This is the case in Europe, and of course in recent years we've seen armed conflict on a worldwide basis. But colleagues, this report is absolutely not about any particular situation or about any particular country or conflict. It's about legal principles. The central issue is how to resolve the inconsistencies between certain provisions of international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Both areas of law are, in the end, intended to protect basic human dignity. What fundamentally distinguishes them is that humanitarian law is special law for armed conflicts. But human rights do not cease to apply during armed conflict. Rather, their application is heavily conditioned by the circumstances, and in certain circumstances, both international humanitarian law and international human rights law are in play at the same time. So the question is how to reconcile the application of the principles that have the same basic purpose but differ in their wording and detail, and also how to ensure highest standards of respect for human dignity and minimising unavoidable human suffering even during armed conflict. Although the International Court of Justice has contributed to resolving these issues, the greatest advances arguably have been made by the European Court. In a series of judgments, the Court has reaffirmed the basic principle of the coexistence of the two areas of law. It's explained how preventative detention, which is permitted under international humanitarian law, will also be permitted by human rights law during armed conflict. This means that the procedural guarantees of human rights law will also apply to preventative detention, and this reinforces the overall protection given to individuals during armed conflict by international law as a whole. The Court has also explained the limits of states' obligations to respect human rights during armed conflict in the heat of battle. At that time, by definition, there is no authority exercising control, and so no one has any jurisdiction. All this report can do is to advocate a pragmatic approach, which does not mean that individuals have no protection under international law, but international humanitarian law still applies, though it must be accepted that when a battle is commencing and soldiers are effectively acting as killers, it's rather difficult to maintain particular adherence to the human rights of the citizens caught in between. The draft resolution, therefore tabled by the Legal Affairs Committee, puts forward these legal concepts. They are important because they define states' obligations to respect human dignity, but they're of little value in themselves if they're not implemented by states and their armed forces. That's why the Legal Affairs Committee report contains a practical package of recommendations, 4 in number. First, being aware of the latest developments in the law, in particular the case law of the European Court. Second, states should ensure that all personnel who may be involved in armed conflict, including private contractors, as well as officials and judges, are aware of the content and application and their duties under the relevant law. Thirdly, the state should provide effective remedies for victims of violations of the law. And fourthly, they should report on the implementation of these measures on a regular and voluntary basis. So in conclusion, the Legal Affairs Committee has presented a deliberately technical draft resolution covering an important area of international law. It recognises the contribution of the Council of Europe, and it encourages concrete action by member states to fulfil their obligations. I accept that this is a difficult area. What has been acceptable in war has changed enormously in the last 100 years and will carry on changing. The end objective of us all must be to end wars which are based on killing each other. But until we get there, this report aims to give a framework within which responsible conduct can be encouraged. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Lord Balfe. You have 2 minutes at the end of the debate. I'm going to call the speakers after lunch, but we will carry on with the presentations from the rapporteurs. Mr. Frides, you are now going to present the oral opinion of the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons. and you have the floor now, and I remind you that you have 3 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, I'll be speaking on behalf of the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons. I'll be introducing an oral opinion. The rapporteur, Mr. Goodfad, was not able to partake in the work of the committee on this issue, nor is he here at the standing committee. He's sent his apologies to the committee secretariat. I should like to first of all commend the work done by the legal committee and the rapporteur, Rod Belf, with a view to commemorating the 70th anniversary of the conventions, which were drafted in the aftermath of the peace agreement signed in 1949. This 70th anniversary was celebrated in 2019, and the ECRC was applauded for its ongoing efforts to ensure the protection of victims of armed conflicts, both international and internal, whether that be dealing with the war-wounded, prisoners, refugees, civilians, or other non-combatants. Today, we're also celebrating a landmark date in the field of international law. That's the 70th anniversary of the 1951 Convention on Refugees. We'd like to reiterate our support, our staunchest support to the international organization coordinating its implementation, the HRC. The Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons met on the 24th of November in Strasbourg, supporting staunchly all of the messages contained in Lord Belf's report, such as the need to guarantee 2 legal regimes which are complementary and consistent. And in fact, we need to ensure that there are synergies between these 2 international law systems. The word synergy often breeds controversy. It's often used to conceal ulterior motives. But we must recall what this word really means. Synergy means interaction or cooperation giving rise to a whole that's larger than the sum of its parts. It means that international protection afforded to a person should be greater if we apply both systems of international law. However, we know perfectly well that these 2 protection systems overlap, as Lord Belf said, only in instances of conflict. And it is then that it is, in fact, this protection is heavily undermined. What's more, such synergies, do we need to seek them where there is no conflict? We should also draw our attention to the fact that the lower the level of legal protection offered in periods of peace, that is minimal protection, for example, as contained in humanitarian law, well, this should be only applicable in times of conflict or in its aftermath. On the other hand, we can agree and support the system of protecting rights, protection guaranteed by humanitarian law, and we want this to be elevated by the system of protection of human rights. In the 21st century, we have no other choice. We've got conflicts which cannot be resolved unless the parties thereto begin adopting guarantees offering heightened protection. It's not about working hand in hand within an established status quo. We should be trying to establish synergies whereby international humanitarian law and international human rights law are elevated instead of being whittled down to the lowest common denominator. Furthermore, we completely agree that we should work hand in hand with all relevant stakeholders, including military companies and private security companies, to ensure that their staff undergo training on international human rights law and international humanitarian law. And we also need to ensure that there are procedural guarantees so that IHL and IHRL are fully applied in the context of armed conflicts. I should like to once again thank the rapporteur. We are submitting the report to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frides. I now call on Lord Griffiths to present the second report. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and colleagues. For the second time, I find presenting my report to the committee and now to the standing committee to have been affected by refoulement, pushback, but I'm very happy to take part in this debate now. And I'm grateful that I've been given the opportunity to present this report. Perhaps I may offer a particular word of thanks to Angela Garabagiu, whose tireless work and unfailing support have ensured that my work, done under pressure of time, exposed me to the thinking of a number of significant decision makers and program leaders while meeting the various deadlines that lay in wait for us along the way. I should have been in Strasbourg yesterday for a meeting of the Migration Committee. Alas, I haven't yet learned to be in two places at the same time. So I missed the debate on the voluntary relocation of migrants in need of humanitarian protection and voluntary resettlement of refugees. That's the latest in a steady flow of reports that have come from the committee down the years for ratification by the Assembly. In their various ways, these reports have all offered a development of the ideas codified in the 1951 Convention, as indeed are the recommendations put forward in my own report today. It would be so easy to play down the cardinal importance of my report in favor of one or another of the pressingly urgent matters before us. Since the completion of my report, so many worrying events have commanded the news. The displacement of people following the withdrawal of international forces from Afghanistan, the instrumentalization of refugees along EU frontier countries by the Belarusian government, as we've just been hearing, the ongoing legal proceedings against 180 aid workers by 13 states on charges including fraud, money laundering, human trafficking, and espionage. The death of 27 people whilst we were gathering here in Rome, deaths that took place in waters between England and France, men, women, and children in search of safety and a better future. My report should stand as a reminder not only of the letter of the Convention whose anniversary we celebrate, but also the spirit in which it was launched. The Convention exudes a spirit of sensitivity towards the frontline states which deal most directly with the displacement of people. It speaks of the need for generosity, humanity, and even offers encouragement to go beyond the merely contractual commitments contained within the text of the Convention. The report also lays great emphasis on the collaboration from the very outset with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, our twin sister, our twin brother, in setting a human rights agenda for the stark world that followed the Second World War. My conversations with UNHCR officials in London, Strasbourg, and Geneva have convinced me that in the future, as in the past, much will depend on the way our two bodies work together. For without any doubt whatsoever, we are currently facing the biggest threat to the agreed ways by which we've approached the protection of refugees over the last 70 years. The Council has already spelled out a series of recommendations for the active involvement of parliamentarians in addressing these needs. Chief amongst these is the Global Compact on Refugees, put out by the United Nations, which since its launch in 2018 has already been endorsed by 181 nations as well as civil society organizations, NGOs, the private business sector, faith groups, scholars, and city mayors. The objectives of the Global Compact are simple, urgent, and stark. They're intended to ease pressure on host countries, to enhance refugee self-reliance, to expand access to third country solutions, and to support conditions in countries of origin for return in safety and dignity. The Compact is a breakthrough which offers a legally non-binding, readily accessible framework document written in plain language under which states agree they will share equitably the responsibility for refugees. In considering this report and hopefully endorsing it, the Council will want to wish those gathering next month at the high-level meeting a fair wind, in the hope that it will inject energy and focus into the process moving forward. We should all understand how necessary this energy and focus are required just now. And so, colleagues and Mr. President, I commend my report to the Standing Committee and look forward to any responses it may generate.
Thank you very much, Lord Griffiths. As I've already said, we will take the questions, the participations in the debate after lunch. But before we go to lunch, I would like to invite Ms. O'Hara to address us. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And there's probably no more uncomfortable position to be in than standing between delegates and their lunch. So I will be extremely brief. Let me first, on behalf of our High Commissioner, who sends his high apologies, he's currently traveling in the Americas, so he delegated me today in my capacity as Director of the Division of International Protection to join you for this particular event. So I would like to extend the sincere appreciation of UNHCR for all the work that has been done in preparing the draft resolution that is before you today, commemorating the 70th anniversary of the 1951 Convention and acknowledging the benefits and its enduring validity in the complex world in which we live today, characterized by ever-increasing numbers of forcibly displaced refugees and internally displaced persons, and unfortunately ever-decreasing numbers of those finding durable and lasting solutions either through voluntary repatriation or resettlement, which means that the vast majority of refugees today continue to be hosted in large numbers over protracted periods of time in their immediate neighboring countries, resulting in a situation where more than 90% of the globally displaced are hosted in the global south and not, in fact, in the countries of the Council of Europe or, for want of a better phrase, those Western and developed states where, if one were to believe the media, one would think that all refugees were headed towards those destinations. I would like to particularly acknowledge the work done, or the work led by Lord Leslie Griffith and colleagues of mine from the Division of International Protection at UNHCR in Geneva have been very privileged and honored, and I might also venture to say inspired by the enthusiasm which he has brought to the work, and we very much hope that the appreciation of this committee will acknowledge that in agreeing to adopt this commemorative resolution. When the member states of the Conference of Plenipotentiaries gathered in Geneva in 1951, their primary concern was the protection of about 2 million people who remained displaced and without protection in Europe 6 years after the end of the Second World War. They were enthusiastic, optimistic, and generous in the convention that they crafted. They also hoped that the institution that had been created the year before by the General Assembly of the United Nations, the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees, would have a very temporary lifespan, initially envisaged only for 3 years. Unfortunately, that has not transpired, and 71 years later, the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees continues to act in locations globally in support of states' ability and willingness to comply with all aspects of the 1951 Convention. And as has been said, and since I promised to be brief, I will not go into the details of the Convention. Suffice it to say that it sets out the definition of who is a refugee, and then it clearly articulates the rights, benefits, and obligations to be enjoyed by refugees. We believe in UNHCR that the Convention is as valid today as it was 70 years ago. We take pride in the successes and achievements that have borne fruit through the cooperation of states, individuals, parliamentarians, refugees themselves, faith-based organizations, academics, NGOs, in fact the whole cast of society whose actions are required to give spirit, to give life to the letter of the law that is set down by the 1951 Convention. And in bringing my comments to a close, I would like to quote from the comments that were made by Ambassador Knut Larsen of Denmark in the closing of the Conference of Plenipotentiaries that took place in the Palais des Nations in Geneva on the 25th of July, 1951. And I hope you will agree with me that he had a certain vision and foresight in concluding with these following comments. We have not kept our eyes on the stars and so created a sort of high-flown system which could not be translated into reality. On the other hand, we have not been too eager to consider only the interests of states. Our document, the Convention on the Legal Status of Refugees, will be the object of study, examination, and also of criticism throughout the world. Certainly, we have not satisfied all wishes and desires. We have not satisfied all the wishes and desires of governments. We have not satisfied the wishes and desires of public opinion in this or that area of the world. And we have not satisfied all the desires and wishes of the refugees themselves, or of those who, on one basis or another, take care of their interests. But I think, he said, we have done nonetheless established a fairly good legal standard and legal status for these refugees, which might become a leading factor in international collaboration. And I think the debate, the resolution, and the work being done by this committee in commemorating the 70th anniversary and all the other commitments to the rights of refugees and those in need of protection very much demonstrates that these closing words were very true. You are in action making a continued contribution to international collaboration for the protection of refugees. Thank you for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much, Ms. O'Hara, for your words and your powerful call for member states to take their responsibility in maintaining a fully functioning system of international protection. And we look forward to further strengthening the excellent cooperation that we've had with the UNHCR in the years to come. Now we're going to break for lunch now. Before we break for lunch, I'm going to ask Despina to make a few practical